What's going on, everyone? My name is Josh DuBois of JDStrategic. We are here today on a beautiful day, episode 3 of the Conquer the Mind podcast. We have a very special guest today. Maybe people can see the resemblance. Some people say we look similar. Other people say not so much. But this is my father on the podcast, also my role model, my mentor. He's played a very strong role in impacting who I am, my work ethic, and today I actually have a special chain on that says we have to have the mentality that we have to work for everything we're going to get. And that's really just a direct result of my father, who's always really had that mentality. And he was someone that really didn't have a lot growing up and still always had that mentality, even today when he is in a fortunate situation because of all the work that he has put in. He still has that mentality that he still doesn't have anything. And that's really something that I've always carried with me today. And I think it's just very powerful today, as you know, the name of the podcast being Conquer the Mind. You know, no one else better really conquered not only their mind, but really just conquered every single day, took massive action to really make their dreams a reality. So today we have my father, Kevin DuBois. He is the CEO of Clean Franchise Brands, which is the parent company to Martinizing Cleaners, Lapels Dry Cleaning, 1-800 Dry Cleaning, Press for Time, and Dry Cleaning Station. And they're operating in 500 stores right now in over 7 different countries. Hopefully I didn't mess up too much there. But thank you, my father, Kevin, for being on the podcast today.
Good morning, Josh. I know there's no chance that I can live up to that billing, but appreciate the kind words. And yes, I think you got the brands and store counts perfect.
Awesome. Well, really, I kind of always start off the podcast with really trying to dive into the background of people. And on this one, I really want to really dive into your background, as today you're a very successful CEO, and it's very easy for someone to look at you and say, it was easy, XYZ, but we both know it definitely was not easy. And something that's always stood out to me is how humble you are. You don't talk about kind of your rags to riches story, but today I think is going to be a really good opportunity for people that may feel lost in life, people looking for those next steps, people just trying to take action in their life. I think this would be really beneficial. So I think just to start off, going back to, usually I start off in high school, I say college, but let's start off with when you're really in middle school. Not great with ages, but I'm thinking probably around 15, 16 years old. What's kind of a day in the life of Kevin DuBois look like?
Yeah, no, I think everybody has like their own creative journey of how they get into business or franchising. And I've heard a couple of your podcasts with some really cool stories of people that have taken either a direct or a scenic route to franchising. Mine was probably very unintentional, is probably the best word to use for it. I guess to go that far back, and I don't know how long we've in this podcast, so I'll try and take a shorter version of it. But I was born and raised in Boston, just south of Boston. My mother and father were separated when I was very young. My mother decided, hey, we'll move down to Florida to be near my grandparents, and that was probably about 10 years old. So lived with my grandparents at that point. So at that age, was living with my grandparents for a while, and then my mom and I went out on our own place. Grew up in South Florida, just outside of Fort Lauderdale, and really didn't know what the next chapter was going to be after graduation. Was really sort of apprehensive, as probably a lot of people are. I see that with kids. It's probably more demonstrative today with, everybody saying, what do you want to do with your life? And what are you going to do, 20 years from now, which I always am sympathetic to that, because I didn't know. I just sort of did it one day at a time and tried to do, the best today that would be the most successful today, and, turn that into a week or a month or a year. But graduated high school right outside Fort Lauderdale with no plan of what I was going to do the next day. College wasn't really viable for me financially, so was sort of thinking about, what am I going to do? I was probably very eager and anxious and really willing to do basically anything at that point. My dad was on Cape Cod, so just outside of Boston. And he had a small diner that he had operated for years, as well as an off-premise catering company. So think like driving a truck to a tent and setting up a wedding kind of thing. And I always thought that was really cool. And as a kid growing up, I would work like weeks during the summer for that business, and really thought that that was an interesting thing. So he offered me a summer job with that business, and very quickly he started growing, just sort of coincidentally. I showed up for a summer, and his business went from a $500,000 business to like a $5 million business within a year. And so, it was haywire, running around different directions. And my first job with him was cooking breakfast at one of the hotels that he had sort of taken over off-premise catering for. So hotels way back then really didn't like food and beverage. They were not good at it. They were not very busy. They usually lost money at it. They were very eager to hand the keys to the restaurants over to restaurateurs. That's really sort of come full circle over the years. And now, like, hey, I was just looking at a hotel for a conference here in Florida, and they do more revenue in food and beverage, $150 million a year in food and beverage. So it's really funny how it's come full circle. But anyway, I would drive in the morning to his commissary and pack up the pancake mix and the eggs and drive an hour to this hotel and cook breakfast and, bring a waitress with me and turn around and come back. And that was like my first real experience with two things. One, just entrepreneurship. I was watching how, money was coming in and money was going out, which was, new to me. I hadn't really seen that profit and loss statement in a real environment before. And it was also a entry into franchising with, a couple of layers removed, which is, these hotels were franchises. And so that was really the early days of work and getting into franchising. And then, in sort of the milestones from there, my father again was starting to lease these restaurants and banquet facilities from hotels. He at one point had gone on vacation, and he would go to Las Vegas for a couple of months during the off season. And I was then at that point working in his diner, and we got a call one day from a hotelier that said, "Hey, we'd love you to take a look at a restaurant that sits in a hotel in Rockland, Massachusetts." And I thought, man, this is great. This is a bigger hotel, had more rooms, had more banquet space. I sort of was looking at it. And coincidentally, my father and I have the same name. So I'm a junior. He was asking Kevin DuBois, probably assuming he was talking to my father. I turn around, call my father and say, "Hey, got great news. We got a big opportunity here. This is a game changer." And I found out in that conversation that people that are on Cape Cod, that grew up in Cape Cod, it's like their own little world. Like they don't like to leave Cape Cod. When they're on Cape Cod, they sort of stay there. And going over that bridge, although it's only about 500 yards, is like a big milestone. So he had no interest in it. He said, "It's too far off the Cape. We can't handle that. It's too much." I hung up, was kind of disappointed for about a minute and a half, and I called the hotelier back and I said, "Yeah, we'd love to look at it. We're very interested. Can I meet you tomorrow?" And so that was like the start of it. And had a meeting the very next morning with that general manager, Ray Schertz, still know him today. And at that time, I'm 18 years old, and I've got my dad's briefcase, and I'm driving my dad's Cadillac. I can remember the briefcase had like 5 rubber bands maybe in it. I thought, hey, this will make me look more professional, and maybe they'll believe that this guy knows what he's doing. And I went up and had that meeting with Ray at the time. And I think, I still think of like what this guy must have been thinking when this kid, who I was 18, but I looked 14 back then. And I can't imagine what he was thinking. But crazy enough, he said, "Yeah, we'd love to have you do it." And they had a nice banquet facility that sat about 250 people, which was sort of what I was interested in a restaurant. And I said, "When would you like us to start?" And I think this was a Friday. He said, "How about Monday?" And I was like, perfect. And at this point, my dad's still in Las Vegas. He still doesn't know what's going on. He assumes that I've told them no. And Monday morning I show up and, just start like digging into it. And at the time, I really didn't know like what I was getting into,
Yeah.
what was shape of it. I was probably too young and stupid to know all the pitfalls that could come out of that. So that was kind of interesting. That was the very first like step into entrepreneurship. And sort of fast forward 2 weeks later, I call my dad and say, "Hey, listen, that opportunity that was crazy. Well, I'm in the thick of it, and I need some help." So that was sort of the start of it. I wound up making a deal with my father to basically pay him a referral fee. I bought him a car for that opportunity. Again, knowing really what I was getting into. And really today, I think about it today, like I would never be bold enough to jump into that situation because as I found out, that hotel had just gone through bankruptcy. They had just called a bunch of brides and said, "Hey, sorry, your wedding's off." And I was sort of jumping into this thing that I had no idea what it was. But we turned that thing around. We were very successful with it. And then other people started calling me saying, "Hey, can you take over this banquet hall, this restaurant?" And so we built that over the next 3 or 4 years into 6 of these restaurants and banquet halls. And again, as I was not only figuring out like how to be an entrepreneur, which entrepreneur was probably too big of a word for what it was at that point. It was just about, getting food out to people and somehow covering payroll on Friday at that point.
Yeah.
But it was very eye opening and it forced me to figure out accounting and bookkeeping and taxes and HR and how to treat people and how to build a business and permitting. And it was a great, University of Hard Knocks is sort of
Yeah.
a cliche, but it really was that. It was a great education. And at the end of the day, I wound up making some money at it, which was, even better. And I was
Yeah.
learning franchising from these hotel groups that were fantastic franchisors. I sort of think about and draw on some of the things that I learned from them. They were very good at reservation systems and call centers and marketing, and quality assurance visits and brand standards and renovations. And, that was all just a great education on entrepreneurship and franchise. So that's how it started.
Well, you just threw a lot at me, so I'm trying to think of where